And then great. And then you can go, you can share your screen again when you're ready, Julie.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, hi, everybody. My name is Jake from Island Heritage Trust. I'm here with Beth from Blue Hill Heritage Trust, and this is a Friends from the Field webinar. Beth is going to do our formal introduction, but first I'm going to do a little bit of tech housekeeping. We're going to use two features today. Raise your hand, which is at the bottom right of your screen. You can raise your hand at the end to ask your questions with your own audio if you'd like. And if you don't want to do that, you can certainly drop a question for Beth and I and Julie in the chat box. Feel free to interact. I think Julie is sort of looking for interaction in this webinar. Usually we sort of hold questions for the end, but today is going to be a little bit more interactive. And I think with that, I'll hand it over to Beth and we'll do a formal introduction.
Great, thank you. My name is Beth Dickens and I am the administrative coordinator at Blue Hill Heritage Trust. And the trust has been working with Island Heritage Trust now for quite a while in bringing these webinar, Friends from the Field webinar series to everyone at home. I know it's been a wonderful asset to have, particularly during the last year and a half. And so I would welcome anyone who is not familiar with either BHHT or IHT to get to our website. And by all means, this programming can't happen without your support. So if you are interested and so moved after listening to this webinar, we encourage you to help us so that we can continue to do this into the future. We're really excited to have Julie Taylor with us today. I had a little bit of a conversation with her briefly before we got started this afternoon, and she is knowledgeable and well skilled in whale watching, and I think that she's going to have a lot for us to learn about today, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. It's a pleasure to, I feel honored to be asked back. It was fun to do this last fall, so I was really excited to come back and join you again. So thank you so much for having me. So a little bit about myself in regards to my background and my time working on the water. I grew up in Massachusetts, so I'm not originally from Maine, but I came here to Bar Harbor to study at the College of the Atlantic. And I was really attracted to that college because it's right on the ocean, and also Allied Whale is there. So that's where I got my start in this field. And then I did an internship with Blue Ocean Society for Marine Conservation down in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That's one of my other home states. And I started working on whale watch boats down there. And then I eventually moved here after I graduated. My husband's originally from Bar Harbor. So I settled here in the area, and I was very fortunate to be hired as a naturalist here back in 2007. So I've been here for a while. And spent many really wonderful days out on the boat that is featured here. That will be our platform for our trip this afternoon out into the Gulf of Maine to learn about the different types of whales, which will be kind of the main topic of what I'll talk about. There's so many species that you can of wildlife and marine life you can see in the Gulf of Maine. We could be here for hours. You're just like an actual whale watch. You'll go out for many hours and see a variety of things. But certainly at the end of our trip, our time, I want to make sure I leave time for questions. But if you do have questions about other marine life, seabirds, sharks, I mean, there's so much that we could potentially see out here. But feel free to ask, any questions about any type of wildlife that we see out offshore. So this is the boat, one of the boats that we have out of Bar Harbor. So I'm with the Bar Harbor Whale Watch Company. And the Friendship 5 is a really interesting boat. It has 3 decks. It's jet powered and it's a catamaran. And so this allows us to travel, sometimes pretty far offshore. We go anywhere from 20 to even 50 miles offshore. So it is quite an adventure. It's quite an excursion out into the Gulf of Maine, out to find whales. They are animals that move around a lot, and you'll hear why they're here in the first place. But as you can see, we carry, lots of folks. Of course, the last couple of years, it's been a little different. But luckily this year and even last year, we were able to get people out on whale watch trips, which was really great, a great outdoor activity, which I think everyone was really anxious to do. And it is a really special experience because you get to interact with or see animals in their natural habitat, and see animals that our relationship has really changed like over the last, couple of centuries. But also, let's see if I can move my cursor here. Let's go. Don't know why it's, there we go. But another really wonderful aspect about the whale watch, and can everyone hear my voice okay? I just want to make sure everything's loud and clear. Okay, I'm sorry, I meant to check. But what's really great about whale watching is not only does it give people the chance to get out and see these animals, but also it's a research platform. So it provides us to collaborate with research groups such as Allied Whale, which we've had this very long relationship with them for multiple years. We carry research assistants. So I invite you to come with us on a trip today to not only be someone that's going to learn about whales, but also to kind of step into the role of like what our research assistants do and essentially what the public is able to do more and more in regards to being a part of the research that we do on the boat. So when you do go out on a whale watch, or if you ever plan on going whale watching, if you haven't gone before, that I encourage you when you do your research on where you want to go and who you want to go with to think about, do they partner with an organization? Do they carry researchers out? Do they carry educators out? Because the whale watch does provide the chance to be able to capture really important information when we're out there. So we've had a relationship with Allied Whale, a great partnership with Allied Whale. And we're also a whale sense participant. And I mentioned this because this is also really important in the sense of how we interact and watch wildlife and watch whales. Whales are protected. They're federally protected animals. Many are still endangered. So we operate under federal or regional, guidelines, and keeping in mind that they're federally protected animals. And since 2012, we've been a whale sense participant in the Atlantic region. So this is a voluntary program that a number of whale watch companies from Maine, we're the only one in Maine, but Maine, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and even in Alaska, we participate to educate the public about the guidelines and the importance of making sure we operate under these guidelines. So when we're out there, we're watching them, the whales, in a respectful manner. We're not disturbing them. So it's really important to also think about how, when you're going out there and who you're going with and how they're going to plan to interact and watch whales. So that's another aspect of what we do. So we collect a lot of different research data. I'll talk about what this research assistant is doing with her camera, but we also are a platform to collect data about the ocean itself. So we participated with Stellwagen Bank Marine Sanctuary to pilot a citizen science project to collect temperature and salinity data. So we've had folks come on and do research on birds or seabirds. So we feel fortunate to, again, have a platform that's utilized by a number of different people for different studies in the Gulf of Maine. And speaking of the Gulf of Maine, so this is a bathymetry map that shows this really unique habitat or ocean in which whales and other wildlife, really a great deal of species, us, including us, really rely upon. It's a very interesting sea, kind of a sea within a sea, a smaller body of water on a continental shelf, which really varies in depth, which you can see with the various shades of blue. So the deeper water out in the Atlantic Ocean. So this is part of the Atlantic, but it's somewhat kind of cut off by these shallow banks like George's Bank and Brown's Bank, but we have water that flows in through this channel here coming from the north, the Labrador Current. We do sometimes see the Gulf Stream, which typically kind of veers off George's Bank, but of course, this ocean, as we know, is changing. It's a shallow ocean that is very susceptible to changes in water temperature and salinity. But historically, because of its bathymetry, its topography, which again you can see here on this chart, or this map rather, that the bathymetry, the tides, we have some pretty substantial tides here in Bar Harbor. So here's Bar Harbor, here's the Bay of Fundy, and tides, currents move the water along these features on the ocean floor and create upwelling currents or tidal currents or rips that bring nutrients up from the bottom. And then you have sunlight, and the combination of the physical aspects of the water, the temperature, the salinity, and also the nutrients in the water and sun, that allows conditions for phytoplankton to bloom up here in this corner, right-hand corner here. And phytoplankton provide oxygen. They also provide food for zooplankton. And then zooplankton can also be food for whales specifically and other marine life, but also fish, schooling fish like herring, capelin, sand lance, hake. So this is it's a very dynamic, very complex ecosystem, but it's a very biologically rich and abundant area for pretty much large restaurant or various places in the Gulf of Maine, these various places that act almost like whale restaurants kind of throughout the Gulf of Maine. But from Bar Harbor, this is kind of the area we cover. So where I'm circling here with the laser pointer. So we can, kind of depending on where the whales are, cover quite a bit of distance and area from Bar Harbor, again, just kind of depending on the whales and where they are. So their movements are really tied to, just like us, but their movements are greatly tied to the food source, like where their food is. Some of these animals, and actually quite recently, a research study discovered that these animals are eating over 3+ tons of prey a day, some of them, especially the larger ones, because they're so big. And so they need to move around to ensure that they find food, and also because they eat so much, the larger whales, that we can use them as environmental indicators to kind of get an idea of what's going on in the Gulf of Maine. So moving on to the whales themselves. So whales are mammals. So we do share a number of characteristics with them. So though they don't, in ways they kind of look like fish, they are not fish, they are mammals. So they breathe air. So that's why we have the opportunity to see them at all. They give birth to live young, they nurse their young. And for the most part, they don't have hair, with the exception of a few species and in certain places on their body, usually on their head. But hair causes drag, and you want to be as streamlined as possible. So not many whales really have hair anymore, with the exception of some that have them on the top of their head, and most likely used as sensory hairs, almost like whiskers on a cat or dog. But whales are broken up into two major groups. So we have the baleen whales, and baleen whales over millions of years acquired this really interesting adaptation that instead of having teeth in their mouth, they have hundreds of these fringe plates that hang down from their upper jaw. So, and even within the group, the baleen whale group, you have different kinds of baleen whales, and they're separated into these different subgroups based on their feeding habits, and their baleen reflect the length and the coarseness of the hair on the inside, reflect the type of prey that they eat. So essentially baleen is kind of creates a sieve filter system in their mouth. And this is what has allowed them, or allows them, to consume a lot of food at once. But they're taking in seawater too. They can't drink that. So the salt water is forced out, usually as the whale swims through the water, or it's pushed out through the baleen plates. So you have whales like the bowhead, which include the North Atlantic right whale, the bowhead whale. So their baleen is much longer because of the shape of their jaw. And so they feed much more differently than some of the other whales here. They are skim feeders or ram feeders. So they feed on dense patches of zooplankton or calanus or copepods. And then other whales like rorquals, which tend to have these pleats on their throat, which allow their throat, as you can see, to kind of balloon or parachute out. Their baleen looks a little bit different. They're typically lunge feeders. They're feeding on larger prey, krill, schooling fish. And so they have the ability to swim a bit faster than, say, a right whale or bowhead. And they have the ability to allow their throat to expand to just engulf their prey in a different manner. And then we don't have the gray whale here, but they feed on shellfish on the bottom. So their baleen is a little bit different compared to, say, a rorqual or a baleen whale like a right whale or bowhead. But in the Gulf of Maine, usually what we're seeing include the humpback. You know, lots of folks are very familiar with the humpback, the fin whale, the minky whale. So that's what we tend to see commonly, but we do occasionally see the sei whale, occasionally see the North Atlantic right whale, and even, it's a bit rare, but the blue whale occasionally. But most likely what we're gonna probably encounter today would be a humpback, a fin whale, and or a minky whale. And sometimes you see all three, you can see multiple species. It just kind of depends. And that's what makes whale watching exciting, even for someone that's been out every day, almost every day during the summers for years. I always used to get excited because you just never know what you may see out there. But to move on, so this is just to kind of go over some of the different parts of the whale. This is really important to know when you're looking for them or looking at them, to kind of get an idea of the different body parts of the various species. And this is a humpback that's featured here. It doesn't necessarily represent how the different body parts look for every single whale, but it allows us to kind of go over some major anatomy for at least baleen whales to start. So I mentioned the ventral pleats, and those are on the bottom. Humpbacks aren't considered technically a rorqual, but they do have pleats like a rorqual whale does, allowing their throat to expand when feeding. And then this is what we call the rostrum, the top of the head. And then we also have the nostrils, or what we call the blowholes. So this is how a whale breathes. It makes sense on top of their head because they don't have to lift their entire head out of the water. So they come up, they contract muscles around, just imagine being able to actually open and close your nostrils. And it's essentially taking your nose and turning it 180 degrees and plopping it on top of your head. But they release air, they're forcefully exhaling air out of their blowholes. And we can visually see that, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then they inhale, and they may do that a few more times. And then they're going to exhale right before they go down. And those muscles relax and they seal the blowhole shut. So that's how they're able to breathe and open and close their blowholes. Most have a dorsal fin, with the exception of the bowhead and the right whale. They lack one, but typically this is what you're going to see, especially so at the surface. And you'll notice once we start getting out and looking for whales, you're going to see kind of more the top portion, the back, the blowholes, top of the head, and the dorsal fin. And this is also something to think about in regards to when we're documenting these animals and what we use to help identify different species and even individuals based on their dorsal fin. This is a favorite word of mine, the caudal peduncle, or the tail stalk. This is just the part between the dorsal and the end of the whale. So the flukes of the tail, which moves up and down. And then pectoral flippers in the humpback, they're pretty large, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So when we're out on the water, so again, we're not going to necessarily see the whole entire animal, kind of depending on what the whale is doing and the species we're looking at. But when out looking, so we visually look, we don't use sonar. We have a fish finder, but that usually it just tells us what's below the boat. We don't put sound into the water. We just look, we visually look along the surface for different signs of whales being at the surface. Sometimes we smell them. They have really interesting kind of bacteria in their lungs that kind of make their breath a little stinky. So sometimes you can smell that. And then also you may, if we're slowing down, or when we slow the boat down, we listen, and they usually exhale about 300 miles an hour. So you can hear that from about a quarter mile away. So it's looking, it's listening, it's smelling the air. Sometimes we smell fish. You can actually smell plankton. So these are all signs that, we might want to keep our eyes out for whales possibly being around. So with humpbacks here on the bottom, so often you're going to see what we see the blow or the spout. So it's the visible breath of the whale. So just like when we exhale, if you live in New England or in a cold climate, you exhale and you see the vapor, and the vapor is this either usually with humpbacks kind of this cloud bush like shape. Some whales it's going to look a bit different, but you'll see the whale blow, and then you'll see its back. There's a dorsal fin as it moves along the surface, and then when they're ready to take a terminal dive, they're going to arch their back. And because humpbacks are pretty stocky animals, these animals have blubber, layer of fat that keeps them warm, and they utilize this blubber in the winter months to survive on, but they're pretty stocky. So to take that deeper dive, they need to lift their flukes or their tail out of the water. And that's sometimes what people see and oftentimes get really excited about, that part of the animal. And as it's indicated here, and we'll see in a minute, humpbacks are interesting because they have a interesting fluke pattern on the underside of their tail, just like our fingerprints are different for each person. A similar concept for humpbacks, but they have these long pectoral flippers, typically white. For this population, you have this kind of knobby tubercles on the head. So sometimes you'll see them stick their heads out of the water, and you'll see these bumps. Those are tubercles. Each one has a hair follicle. Again, they're pretty stocky. That stubby fin with a hump, and then they'll usually, again, lift their tail out of the water when they're taking a dive. So that's what you want to be on the lookout, and you'll know if it's a humpback if you're seeing that at the surface. And then with fin whales, so this is the second largest whale we see, or second largest whale rather in the world, and typically the largest species we see. Humpbacks are roughly about the size of a school bus. A fin whale is about a school bus and a half roughly in size. So these are animals that range anywhere from 60 to 70 feet. Humpbacks maybe about 40, 45, 50 feet. But these whales, the finbacks, and you'll see why they're called the finbacks, because of their dorsal fin, small pointed dorsal fin, 2/3 the way down their back. But they're very long, they're very streamlined. They can move pretty quickly through the water. They're nicknamed the greyhounds of the sea because of their ability to burst up to speeds of almost 30 miles an hour when chasing after fish. And they are rorqual. They have those pleats on the underside of their jaw extending down to their belly button. And when they surface, similar things. But you're going to see a very tall column-shaped spout, and then their back. Here's the blowholes, the first part of the back. And on their back, they have this chevron that I'll talk about in a minute, but that's another thing to be looking out for them. When you see them at the surface, is that grayish swirly pattern. But then you'll see the dorsal fin, but because they're much more streamlined and not as stocky, they're just going to arch their back, see the caudal peduncle, and then they just sink. So you're typically not going to see a tail with a fin whale. But again, these are whales that reach about half the size of the Friendship 5, the boat that we were riding on, or we ride on. So it's, again, pretty incredible to think that we have the opportunity to spend time with some of the largest animals to ever exist on our planet. So the fin whale, or finback, is a pretty large critter. Then we have the Minky, the smallest of the baleen whales. These are really, really great species to see. And sometimes just here in Frenchman Bay, or kind of depending on where folks are, but along the coast of Maine, sometimes in the summer, you can be not too far from shore. I've been in Acadia hiking, Sand Beach, even sometimes right off Sand Beach, you've seen them. So sometimes they come a little bit closer to shore, feed on Manhattan or pogies, but they look very similar to a fin whale. They're just much smaller. They're about 20 feet long. I have these white patches on their flippers, what we call minky mittens. Sometimes you can see those under the water, which is here. And so with a whale, anything white will appear kind of green because of the phytoplankton in the water. And you'll certainly see that with humpbacks when they surface. So this is a whale that's roughly about 15 to 30 feet long. And Balaenoptera acurostrata means a whale with a pointed snout. So sometimes what you see first, just their snout come out of the water, and then you don't always see a visible blow. Sometimes you'll hear it, sometimes you'll smell them, but you're really just going to kind of see the back, and the falcate dorsal fin really stands out when they surface. And then the last one I'll talk about is a whale that is widely talked about these days because of its endangered status. But this is the North Atlantic right whale, and their numbers unfortunately have decreased. They're critically endangered species. They were the right whale to hunt because they're fairly stocky. They're were hunted for their oil, as humpbacks, fin whales, and other whales were. And then there's other human caused mortalities that they're dealing with right now. But they feed on copepods. They are a really interesting looking whale, and they have this V-shaped spout. So that's an indicator of a right whale. Also, when they surface, if you don't see a dorsal fin, you see this big dark back with no dorsal, probably a right whale. And because of how stocky they are, they're going to lift their tail out of the water, and they have the smoothed edge, dark tail. And sometimes they'll have these white patches on the underside of their body. And then they're known for these callosities, these raised patches of skin where cyamids collect. So kind of in the same place where we have hair. So up on their eyes, a little eyebrow, on their chin, on their lip. So they pretty much have callosities in the same location in ways we have facial hair. But you can identify right whales based on the callosity pattern. And that's what scientists photograph out in the field. So that's the baleen whales. We'll start with them, but lash your eardrums out. So I'll try and lower that. But let's see. But that is pretty much what it sounds like when we're heading offshore. Sorry, just lower that a little bit. So this is typically what it's like when we're underway. So our boat moves to the water. So as you can see, so if you haven't been whale watching before, you do want to go, you'll see that folks have lots of layers. It gets really windy. It gets much colder because the average temperature out there is roughly about 55 degrees Fahrenheit for water temperature. But always good to have layers, hat, sunglasses, put your sunblock on because the ocean's going to really make those sun rays amplify them a little bit. But this is how we head out, and passengers are encouraged to keep an eye out. The more eyes you have looking, that's going to increase your chances of finding something. Whales can really surface anywhere. So as a passenger, as well as working on the boat, everybody's looking, keeping a sharp eye out. We're going to go to certain areas in the Gulf of Maine, as I mentioned earlier, to find them, because we find that they do tend to hang out in certain spots due to the bathymetry and where food tends to congregate offshore. So we're going to be coming up upon a whale here in a minute. And so I'm going to show you the video, and we're going to see if we can guess what it is. Okay. So I'll give you a moment based on what we saw and what I described earlier and how to identify a certain whale. What do you think that is? I'll kind of just let people think about it. And if you guessed fin whale, you were right. So fin whales, as you can see, when they move through the water, can they kind of move fairly quickly as they surface, kind of depending on what they're doing. But I have here 3 different pictures, and if you look at them, you'll notice kind of there are slight differences in the dorsal fin. So that's, as a research assistant or someone collecting data on these types of animals, on fin whales, we photograph the dorsal fin and also that chevron pattern I mentioned. And then there's catalogs that started back at College of the Atlantic Ally Whale in the 80s. And we document them and are able to track animals through this mark recapture methodology. So you don't have to actually put some kind of satellite tag on them or physical tag, but we can photograph them. We take the photos through catalogs to see if we can ID them based on their dorsal shape, and also utilize the chevron pattern to see if we can identify the animal. And if it's an animal not in the catalog, it's then a new animal documented and added to that that database. So that's a neat thing about fin whales and what we collect for data on them when we're out on the whale watch. So that is a fin whale. And then we'll see if you can guess what we're looking at here.
We do see sharks out here, and our most common species of shark would be the basking shark, and they are the 2nd largest shark in the world. They can be, oh, here comes, I just want to put out, here comes the tail for spinnaker, and then here will come bottleneck. Very nice looks here. Beautiful shots of their tail. Basking sharks have been known to reach about 40 feet long, weigh 16,000.
All right, so now, if you guessed humpback, you were right. And so humpbacks, as we remember, you may have noticed like kind of that bushy shaped spout, kind of moving a little slowly at that surfacing. And you may have noticed the green next to the whale. So those are long flippers. And then, of course, when going for a dive, it lifted its tail out of the water, or both of them. So over time, and actually before fin whales, and understanding that fin whales had natural markings we could photograph and be able to distinguish individuals that way, humpbacks really were the ones that were studied quite intensively starting in the 70s. And then College of the Atlantic Ally Whale realized that when documenting them that they have different patterns underneath their tail. And then over time, kind of starting more so in southern Gulf of Maine off Massachusetts, they started naming them. And this is a tradition that continues on to this very day. And so we name them based on certain patterns or markings they have on their fluke. So I was going to invite you to really study these whales here. We're going to go over a little bit about them because we found that whales show sight fidelity, and humpbacks will come back to the same area or region, or they even move around within the Gulf of Maine quite a bit. But if they come back, we can really learn a lot about these animals and their life history. So 9 is a female humpback, and she was born in 1989, and her mother was Rune, or is Rune. And so we know it's that 9's a female because we've seen her with calves. And she's had 6 known calves. So she's a pretty well-known large female in the Gulf of Maine population. And then we have Grommet, and Grommet, we're not really sure of Grommet's gender. So sometimes we don't know unless we can collect skin sample, blubber samples. Sometimes that can help us through genetics determine their gender, or you have to see certain anatomy. But this whale was born in 1997. So that, and excuse me, Sloop is Grommet's mom. So it's kind of cool. Like we can build family trees. Like we can understand the these animals and who they're related to, based at least from the mom's side, because these whales, they go all the way down to the West Indies. They give birth down there, or they breed down there, and then they're pregnant for about a year. Then they go back down after coming back up into the higher latitudes of the North Atlantic. Then they bring their calves back the following summer. So calves won't usually be named for another few years because it takes a while for their the patterns to really darken. So we wait a while to name them. But this is Bayou. And as you can see, Bayou's tail looks a little interesting. Unfortunately, Bayou was born in 2006 to a whale named Trident. And around 2008, she suffered an injury. And most likely a boat strike or possibly an entanglement. These are the two big issues for them in the Gulf of Maine and elsewhere in the world, interacting with fisheries, and then also being accidentally struck by boats. So that's why, again, the guidelines are really important to, even though we have water jets, it's still important to make sure we keep our distance. But however, Bayou has really hung in there, and we had some really exciting news to share about her this year that we witnessed when we were out this summer. And then Owl, you can probably see how she got her name. I love Owl. I've known her for years and seen her for years. But she was born in 1986, and her mom is Falco. So these are whales, just like familiar friends, like that, we see and get really excited to see, and passengers get really excited to like hear that we know this whale, an individual we've seen for years sometimes. It's just always really exciting to go back out there every summer and see these whales that we know, and some of which we've known for years. All right, so kind of quickly study these tails because you're going to be quizzed on, see if you can identify each one. Okay, so give you one more moment, and now I'm going to switch to this photograph. Okay, so the whale Fluke, we took a picture. So can you guess who that is? So if you said Grommet, you're right, because again, those markings there. So it just kind of really depends. Sometimes you get a good shot of the tail, or sometimes at a funky angle. There's also that notch right there that helps us ID that whale on its trailing edge. Okay, and who's this? Give you a minute to look at it. So if you answered Owl, you're right. So I know it's kind of a funky angle, but that very distinctive spot there. She also has some other parts of her fluke that allow us to ID her, and she is going to the bathroom. So that's something we also document. And also whales are really important to this ecosystem because they recycle carbon, nutrients. So that poop there, which it looks like she was probably eating fish based on its color, but she came to the surface to go to the bathroom. That's where they do it. They go to the bathroom at the surface. They're not going to do it while they're on a dive because of the pressure they encounter down on a deep dive in deep water. So they bring nutrients up to the surface that phytoplankton really rely on that. And then thus phytoplankton is food for zooplankton, fish, and the cycle continues. So this is another important thing about whales and understanding them and protecting them and their value to the ecosystem because of what they do naturally, just like we do in their environment, in their habitat at the surface. So that's Owl. Now Owl also, sometimes the whales don't fluke and we don't know who it is because we don't see the tail, but sometimes whales have certain scars or markings that allow us to ID them. This is kind of a funky angle, but she encountered a boat strike at some point in her life, and she has this big divot in her back. So when she surfaces, before we even see her tail, we know it's her because she has this big scar. But even though she's dealt with or was struck by a boat, unfortunately, many years ago, she still sometimes comes pretty close to the boat and doesn't seem to mind boats. But that's another way you can ID her. So through this video, you'll see you know, can you see which one she is? These two hanging out. Is she the whale on the right or the whale on the left? So she's, if you guess the whale on the left, you're right. So you could really see that scar on her back. So sometimes we see whales in pairs. You see them in groups of 3, 4, 5 or more, kind of depending on what they're doing. They can be alone. Usually pairs or trios tend to be what we see for group size. But those aren't long lasting relationships. They're or associations. Sometimes they're together within or just for a few hours, sometimes a few days. It really depends. We sometimes see them hanging out with all sorts of different individuals. So their social interactions and associations are fascinating. We're still trying to learn about those and what they mean. But sometimes they keep us hostage. This was taken by one of our guides this summer. They swam right up to the boat. We never approached them this close, but we pretty much could not move because we had these two whales right next to us.
There is a dolphin. All right, Mom, let's go. Wow. All these pictures you're taking today. That is amazing.
Yeah, so that just really is very humbling. It really gives you an idea of how big they are. And the whales that we had that day were, so do you know who this is? So the whale on the right is Mom Bayou, and this is her first known calf that she had this year. So, and they did this multiple times to us. They would come really close to the boat, hang out with us. Sometimes the calf is left with us. Mom goes and does, you know, her thing and then comes back. So it's just really interesting, these interactions we have. But it was really exciting to see Bayou with her first calf. So again, it's like really exciting what you get to witness and discover and document when you're out on these whale watch trips. It's really, really neat. So I mentioned the family tree aspect of understanding their genetics and their who they're related to in this population. So here's Bayou at the bottom and her siblings. Draco we see sometimes too. Then Trident, their mom, and Flag, their grandmom. So we know whales, you know, that are great grandmothers. Yes, it's I think it's just kind of cool to have that, you know, similarity. You know, we have a very similar connection with them in the sense of their relations with other whales. And if you are ever out on your own boat or you're elsewhere in the world whale watching or here, this is a really interesting citizen science project called Happy Whale. So if you were to be out on a boat, you photograph a whale, you can submit it to this website and they can identify who it is. And usually if you can give them an idea or the location, they'll show where you saw your whale on this map. And then if there's a whale you saw maybe on a whale watch, you can search it and it can show you where the whale has been seen. So we have whales that are all over the Gulf of Maine, you know, from Massachusetts, Stellwagen Bank to the south, to Bay of Fundy to the east, northeast. And then here's Pinball, this whale on the right, another well-known female humpback. So she's been seen and documented all the way down, you know, towards the Dominican Republic, Turks and Caicos. So she's been documented down there. And so this whale, again, this is 9. And then this is 9's dorsal. So again, the dorsal fins can really help us distinguish between individuals. She has this really long, kind of floppy dorsal. So sometimes when we see that, oh, it's 9, we know who it is. And then sometimes it can indicate what they've been doing. So this whale on the right, this is Sword, and Sword must have gone down to the bottom where it's muddy and maybe dragged its body along the bottom. So that gives us an idea of the habitat that they're using at the surface as well as down along the bottom. And that's really important to know in the sense of managing the species and the other type of human activities that go on out in the ocean. And then this is 9 and her calf. So she had a calf this year, which is really exciting. The calf unfortunately encountered some obstacles coming up here at some point, most likely a boat strike. So I know this might be a little tough to see, but it's to just show that, you know, these are things that whales are trying to deal with when they're out there in their own habitat. But so this is the whale's Fluke. So a bit of an injury there, but a very active whale despite having these injuries. So hopefully it'll keep going and be fine into its adult life. And then this is Grommet. So Grommet, just a funky angle there due to the angle of the camera. So I know I'm kind of getting short on time, but I don't want to leave out our toothed whales. So we have our baleen whales that we see, and humpbacks again are whales we're seeing more frequently now than in the past. Fin whales we do see occasionally, minke whales occasionally, but the humpbacks are certainly pretty prevalent. And then our toothed whales. So these are whales that have teeth in their mouth. They use to capture their prey, squid, fish, sometimes other marine mammals. For the case of the transient killer whales or orcas. But this includes sperm whales, beluga whales, orca, pilot whales, these really interesting beaked whales that are whales you'll find really far offshore. And then dolphins, Atlantic white-sided, common, the porpoise, and porpoise and dolphin are different. So we see both in the Gulf of Maine, and probably the most common toothed whale you'll see is the harbor porpoise, which is featured here on the right. So the difference between the two, because they are two separate groups of toothed whales, dolphins, as you'll see on the right, are a little bit bigger. It's kind of hard to tell with this photo, but they're bigger. They have a taller dorsal. They tend to stay at the surface longer. They'll usually approach the boat if they want to. And this photo down here shows that toothed whales compared to baleen whales are much smaller. They have teeth in their mouth, but they also have a single blowhole, while baleen whales have two. And then looking at porpoise, so porpoise tend to have a bit more of a flattened face. They don't have like a beak-like snout like dolphins do. And they have a stubbier dorsal. And they only tend to come up a couple of times unless they're feeding on a school of fish. Sometimes we'll see them more than once. But porpoise are pretty abundant. They do stay year round, but we tend to see most of them in the summer and fall. And they give birth in the summertime. So we see moms and calves in the summer. They're about 4 to 5 feet long. They weigh about 150 pounds. They have a white underside and a stubby little dorsal. So this is what will indicate porpoise at the surface. You just see this stubby little dorsal fin, a little grayish back, and then down below the surface they go. And then the Atlantic white-sided dolphin, beautiful species, much larger, 7 to 9 feet long. They have this beautiful kind of yellowish gold band on their peduncle, towards their peduncle, and then this white patch. And you'll often find them in groups or pods, and also the harbor porpoise too. And usually most times of the year, except for the summer, they'll sometimes get into these big pods, but it's usually females and juveniles, and the males are on their own or in their own pods, and then they'll come together when it's time to breed, usually in the summer. But they're beautiful. They're really fun to see when we're out there, but we only see them about a quarter of our trips. And they are kind of starting to see that they're shifting a little bit further north as well. But they are fun to see when we're out on the water. So we also sometimes see bottlenosed. We see short-beaked common dolphins. They're really neat. And then the long-fin pilot whale. So these are some of the other larger species in the dolphin family that we see. Orca, rare. Beth and I were talking about Old Tom, this lone male orca that goes all around the Gulf of Maine. But they are a bit rare compared to the orca you hear elsewhere around the world, especially in the Pacific Northwest. But in the next slide, so if you guessed Atlantic white-sided, you are right. So again, they're much larger in that taller dorsal, and some calves in that group. And that's what we see in the summertime. And then in the next slide, I'm going to show you just, you kind of want your volume a little high, but if you have headphones on, it might be a bit loud. But this summer we had a hydrophone that we use, which is a microphone you put into the water and you can pick up sound with it. And this is often, acoustics are a big way in which scientists study whales. But we had a pod of dolphins and we dropped the hydrophone in, and this is what we were able to capture. So I don't know if you heard that. I know it's a bit loud, but they produce these sounds. Whales produce sound. They have these high pitched squeaks and squeals they make. So it was really neat to actually hear them while watching them. So whales communicate. They find food through sound. Sound is a really important sense for them, and they produce sound through their larynx near their blowhole, and then also through air sacs. And then they have a melon that kind of directs the sound, and they use echolocation like a bat. So that's how they find their prey. And then they're really fun to see.
Very different kind of lake to run along with the boat.
Oops, sorry about that.
On our left-hand side, you can see them right underneath us, right swimming right with us underneath the water, coming right up. You can see just how incredibly different dolphins are. And even Hydrophone, all the way out, beautiful work, even coming from behind us. Keep looking.
Once they find the food, then that is also where they will go ahead and they will take with them larger pods. That may be out further. They communicate using echolocation.
So these are common dolphins. They do look very similar to Atlantic white-sided, but they have they're just a bit like a more streamlined, kind of a longer beak. And as you can see, like they and Atlantic white-sided can jump right out of the water too, but they swim very quickly. We sometimes they can be a bit elusive, so it was pretty cool to see them bow riding. So this is something they chose to do. We try not to encourage it, but they do sometimes do that. So I know we're getting close on the end of our time, but that's the end of our quick whale watch trip for the evening. But I hope you enjoyed learning about some of the species that we see out there, and what we usually do when we're out on the water. That the opportunity to get out there is great. If you haven't had a chance to come out with us, be great to see you if you're in the Bar Harbor area or wherever you may go, wherever you may be. Whale watching is a really fun experience, and there's nothing like seeing them in their natural habitat. So thank you. And I can certainly, with the time we have left, take any questions if we have any questions.
So if folks have got questions, they can either post them in the Q&A section, or we do have the chat box that are both down at the bottom of the screen. I've been looking, and so far there haven't been any. I think it's because everyone wanted to watch to make sure that they were getting all your facts and wonderful photos.
Julie, while we wait for some questions, I wanted to ask, what is something or a group of experiences that still sort of like surprise and shock you about whales when you're out on the water, like something that you just haven't gotten used to yet?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a lot of their associations with each other, and also kind of getting an idea of where they're going. And for example, so Bayou or Nine was seen for a number of weeks down off Massachusetts in the beginning of the season. Then she finally arrived up here. So I think what really continues to fascinate me is where do they go? Like, what are they kind of experiencing between the places they're going? I mean, their migrations are incredible. Within a month, they can travel almost few thousand miles. So I think that's what still kind of baffles me, and getting an idea of where they are and where they're going, and then who they kind of end up with and who they're hanging out with, and a lot about their behavior that we speculate or have a lot of understanding of what they mean, but what are they trying to communicate with each other? Kind of learning their behavior and their language too is always something that continues to fascinate me. Yeah, or like leave me
Yeah, they're
wondering.
truly creatures. They're truly creatures of the world, aren't they? I just want to let you know that Allison dropped a thanks and just wanted you to know that the presentation was incredible in her words. So
Oh,
thanks for that.
thanks.
Julie.
Thank you.
We do have one question here. It says, is it possible for a whale to swim in, I'm assuming it's Somme Sound? I know that's the body of water that, yes, Somme Sound, yes. So that's, obviously you probably know that's on MDI.
Yeah, very familiar with some sound, love some sound. We certainly see porpoise. I mean, it's certainly possible, for Minky whale. I mean, even in Frenchman Bay, long before my time, I thought there was times in the 90s, we had all sorts of whales here. And we have minkies here as well. Sometimes even we had a fin whale not too long ago. So it's certainly possible. I mean, they sometimes surprise us, and though they're not there all the time, at least with the larger whales, you never know, just depending on maybe what it's going after, or if it's chasing after a fish. But certainly porpoise, and I don't think a minke whale would be out of the question. I have yet to see one there, but that doesn't mean they haven't been seen there before or wouldn't go in there.
So Ellen Rowan is the one who asked that initial question, and she had said that her daughter, who it sounds like was 10 at the time, said that she had seen one many years ago. And I do know that I have seen of people reporting that you can see them just off of Schoodic Peninsula.
Yeah.
So that's another great place. And I think those are typically minke whales when they see them there.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, there's definitely some places from land that you can occasionally see them for sure. Yep, Schoodic's great. That's another great, because it juts out, like it juts out into the Gulf of Maine much further than other locations. So you see a lot of pelagic birds there sometimes, and definitely I've seen minkies there. Sometimes the whale watch has stopped like right off Schoodic, and we have minkies, we've had tuna. So there's definitely a possibility there for sure.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions. We do have about 5 more minutes or so. So if anyone can think of anything, by all means, now's the time to put that in the chat box or in the Q&A section. And if for some reason you leave the meeting today and you find that you've got a question, you are more than welcome to contact either BHHT or IHT, and we will make sure to get that question to Julie and get that answer back to you as soon as we can.
Julie, do you have a favorite whale or associated memory?
Ooh, that is a good question. It's hard. Oh, yeah. I mean, I definitely have ones I feel like I kind of get attached to. Owl has it's become a really special whale because when I first started whale watching, I saw her off New Hampshire, and then I even had family like my grandfather come out and he saw her. So often when I see her, I think of him. And there's one whale we named after someone went to COA who died in the 2004 tsunami, Fundy. So when we see her, that's like a very emotional experience, kind of think of her in the memory of this whale and her devotion to marine mammals. And so she's a favorite.
Was that Rebecca by any chance?
Okay. Yeah, that was Rebecca Clark. So seeing the whale and the story behind it and its name always kind of brings up like those special memories of somebody associated with that whale, the name of the whale or who named it. and just like whales I've seen over the years, but owls up there, pinball is also another one. But recently we've been seeing lots of whales though documented that I've never seen before. I'm doing this over about 15 years, and seeing like whales that are now becoming ones I'm starting to become a little bit more familiar with. Like Bayou's been like a lot of fun to see, Nine too, and lots of others. But yeah, I'd say pinball and owl, just in my time and working in the Gulf of Maine have been like my two.
So we have a few questions that have popped up. One was that Bundy had mentioned that she had seen a basking shark on whale watches, and those are definitely one of my favorite sharks to see. And she asked, do you see them very often?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It kind of fluctuates. This year we saw a couple here and there. Last year felt we saw more. And there was also the ocean sunfish. You know, we had the year of the ocean sunfish a couple of years ago. And then we had a few basking sharks last year. We did have one or two that I saw offshore. One breached one time. That was pretty cool. So we do see them occasionally. It's sometimes more frequently in certain years than others. And kind of like whales, they can also be indicators of kind of what's going on in the Gulf of Maine, but it can kind of fluctuate year to year. Yeah, but they are one of my favorites too. They're really, really cool to see.
We also have Sally asking what fish are whales' favorites, and then she has seals question marks. So I'm assuming she's asking if seals have got a favorite fish in addition to whales in this area.
Yeah, that's a great question. For a long time, Atlantic herring have been a keystone species for whales, for seals, for sharks, for all sorts of seabirds. So it's something they tend to target here. In other places, like on Stellwagen, they eat sand lance, so like Capeland, Manhattan, which we're starting to, we've been seeing a lot more inshore. So probably the porpoises and seals. We've seen seals and porpoises and seabirds all going for like pogies. So it just kind of depends on where they are, what type of food is abundant in that habitat or location they're feeding. So it's almost like there's like different restaurants with different items on the menu, kind of depending on where they are. But for here in this region, Atlantic herring, which is a species that's kind of struggling a bit, but that tends to be the top menu item for a lot of different animals here, marine animals.
Excellent. Well, Paula Marzicki would like to say thank you for a wonderful presentation, and she can't wait to bring her granddaughter to Bar Harbor to go on a whale watch next summer. I'm sure that you have recruited quite a few people today to join you next summer. So hopefully they will seek you out. Again, what whale watch company do you work for?
So I work with Bar Harbor Whale Watch Company.
Excellent. Okay, so folks, if they are interested and want to touch base with you directly on that whale watch experience, they'll make sure to find you there. And I think that wraps up pretty much all the time we have. Jake, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, just to say thank you to Julie for coming back and doing this amazing presentation for us again.
Yes, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much.
And Julie, if you wouldn't mind stopping the recording.
Let's see. Stop share and then or stop recording.